it's okay as a Christian to say, I don't know. And I think that we have gotten away from that. We've gotten to this place where we feel like we have to have an answer for every single thing that somebody throws at us. And that's impossible. You're not going to have all the knowledge in the world to be able to articulate and understand every single argument or every single thing that somebody might say. And just take comfort in the fact that Christianity does not hinge on your knowledge of all things.
Yes.
It doesn't stand or fall on whether or not you know everything. Christianity can still be true even if you don't know something. Hey, welcome back to Campfire Apologetics, where I help give the everyday Christian tools to help defend their faith in an unbelieving and hostile culture. I'm joined today by Tim Howard, who is he runs the YouTube channel and Instagram, and I don't know if you have a podcast or not, but he runs Worldview Mastery, and it's an awesome channel, and I would encourage everybody to look that up and follow it. But I'll turn it over to you, Tim, and I'll let you kind of get into what it is that your channel is about and tell us about yourself and whatever it is you want us to know, where you live. We were kind of getting into that if you want to talk about that. But yeah, whatever you want to talk about, man, just go ahead and shoot from the hip there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Mark, for having me on, and I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, so my name's Tim Howard. I'm 26 years old. I live in Washington State, so the awesome Pacific Northwest over here. I do run Worldview Mastery. That is truth. It says right down there, owner of Worldview Mastery. And yeah, we're a YouTube channel, social media page. We're pretty much a ministry/initiative that's really passionate about not just telling Christians what to think and what answers are good in terms of your apologetics journey, but we're all about helping you craft a worldview, a Christian worldview that you resonate with, that you feel is strong, that you feel in control of, and that is through teaching Christians how to think. So my job over at Worldview Mastery is to give you the tools and the resources to think well on your own and to think confidently, so that any objection or any conversation or any argument you come across, you feel fully equipped without having to have a late night Googling session. How do I answer the problem of evil? How do I deal with slavery in the Bible? You have everything you need to be able to address those in real time by yourself. That's going to give you the utmost confidence and assurance, and also give you a credible voice as well. I'm passionate about this because this is actually my journey, right? I got into apologetics around the age of 14, and I didn't really find church all that interesting. I was raised in the church. I actually prayed the prayer when I was 5 years old, coming home from a church event with my dad. And yeah, I about 3 churches later, I was about 8 years old, and in that church was the first time I actually heard about apologetics, and that there is such a thing as defending your faith. And what I was really intrigued by was the fact that you could think intellectually about this. And I didn't know that that was an itch that I needed to scratch, but it was like for the first time I actually looked up at the pulpit and actually paid attention. Prior to that, did not pay attention. And so I remember there was like an apologetics forum being hosted at my church and at that time. And I remember being like 13, 14, being like, wait a minute, there's a non-Sunday event where I can sit down, I can listen to like why atheism's wrong, like and like actual facts that support what the Bible says and God's existence and all that stuff like that. So I just went just crazy, just deep diving into it. But one of the things that I realized, and one of the struggles that I had, was I would hear a certain version of Christianity and the case for Christianity at my church. And when I would go on YouTube, so I don't know if everyone remembers, and Mark, I don't know if you remember, but like 2014 atheism on YouTube was all the rage. The new atheism movement was in its heightened state. And you had these people like godless skeptic, godless engineer, genetically modified skeptic. You had all these people, TMM, you had all these people just trampling on Christianity. And I would be afraid to watch these videos because they would bring up stuff I've never heard. And so I remember at one point I had a little crisis of faith. I was like, I basically have to pretend like my faith is rationally supported But I don't, but how can I say that in the face of me not being able to answer these individuals? And so fast forward to now, I am passionate about not having any Christian have to face that. And you don't have to face that. And the thing that fixed that for me was I got really into philosophy. And if you want
Mhm,
to make philosophy simple, it's just the art of thinking well. It's the art
mhm.
of dedicating yourself to wisdom and good thinking. And in doing so, and I went very, very deep into it. In doing so, I realized, there's actually only a finite number of directions you can actually go in terms of thinking well and actually employing principles of good reasoning. And if you learn them, you can basically plug and play, plug and apply them in any situation. And the cool thing about it is I realized when you do so, there's actually no reason to compromise the Christian faith. The core fundamentals of the Christian faith are not in jeopardy. And so that's why I'm passionate about this. What we do at Worldview Mastery. I run an academy where I teach a plurality of students on how to do this as well. And we do weekly calls, we do objection handling role plays. I have ebooks, resources, and things like that. So I'm going to plug that there for everyone who wants to
Yeah.
really get involved in this process. They can join the academy and call it the Transcending Answers Academy, going beyond answers, training you to think well for yourself as a Christian. So there you go, Mark.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. That's a lot. That's awesome. I didn't know you had like a little teaching academy and things like that, but that's really cool.
Yeah.
Did you have like a formal education in theology or philosophy or any of those things or
Nope. I only have 2 philosophy classes under my belt. Everything else is
okay.
completely self-taught.
Okay, nice. And what are some of the resources that you used when you got into studying philosophy?
Yeah, so when I felt like I was at a point where I was getting really serious about this, that was about probably age 17, maybe 18. I actually picked up this book. It's actually really fun. I had it right next to me. It's called The Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, and it's
Mhm.
edited by the OGs, William Lane Craig, J.P.
Okay.
Moreland. And pretty much this book is an essay of it's actually a compilation of I don't even know how many essays. It's a compilation of 11 essays, and they cover everything from God's existence to evil to miracles, resurrection, all that stuff. And it's the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. Natural theology is using reason to conclude that God exists. And so basically, it's an entire collection of the most modern, up to date essays from the greatest Christian philosophers and theologians of our time, putting forth arguments for the existence of God and Christianity. And I remember I didn't even know a book like that existed at the time. And I was like, dude, I remember saying to myself, I'm like, dude, if I can master this book, I will be a powerhouse. I'll be a force to reckon with. Like that's how I was feeling at that time. And that actually ended up being gateway drug because I'll be honest with you, dude, it's 2025. I got this book in 2018. I've never read through the whole thing because what
Oh
ended up
yeah, yeah.
happening was it was the biggest gateway drug of my life. I just ended up that exploded into all sorts of research projects in
Okay.
other areas. So it was that book that really, uh,
Yeah.
you know, uh, catapulted me to the next step.
Yeah. I have quite a few books that are like, pretty dense like that one. And I think what I end up doing with them is I use them more of like a as a reference type book.
Oh
They're not
yeah, yeah,
really, books that I would just read straight through. But yeah, there's always such good information in all of them. And what's crazy is I was very, very early on, I was very much into William Lane Craig. And I've never I've never read any of his books. I've just watched a lot of his debates and lectures and things like that. But for whatever reason, I don't know. I guess earlier on when I got into him, I wasn't as into reading, so I just just never ended up picking up any of his books. But I might have to look into that one because that sounds pretty interesting. Um, but yeah, more recently, I've gotten a lot more into reading Greg Bonson and Cornelius Van Til and things like that. But anybody who's interested, if you're watching, if you download the RTS app, there are like free lectures and courses and
mm,
stuff that you could take on there. And there's some, biblical Christian philosophy and things like that. And it's been really helpful to me. So uh, I think it would probably benefit a lot of people, but and maybe you too. There's always we're always learning, right? So
absolutely every
yeah,
day.
there's always things to learn and go over. But yeah, I wanted to bring you on because your channel is all about thinking differently, thinking differently as a Christian. And I think that that's really important to kind of drive home when we're thinking about apologetics and we're thinking about evangelism, because early on, as we were talking before I hit record there, I was more in the kind of classical or evidentialist camp. And this isn't that's not to say that everybody in that camp thinks this way, but this is just how I did when I was kind of adopting more of that methodology. I would hear arguments. I would take all of the popular arguments, and then I would just try to memorize the responses to those arguments. But I think that there's a danger in trying to memorize different arguments, because then you're stuck in this loop of only being able to think within the arguments you've heard. You
Mhm.
don't train yourself to think outside of the box. You don't train yourself to really listen to what somebody is saying and hear the kind of the worldview implications of the argument that they're making. You don't really think about, okay, what are they presupposing, or what are they assuming in the argument they're making, in order for that argument to make sense for them. And so I was stuck in this loop of memorization. And then I would be presented with arguments that I hadn't heard before. Like you were
Mhm.
saying, you're like, oh, I haven't heard any of this stuff before. And then I was stuck with, oh, well, crap. How do I answer this one? Because this one's a different one than what I heard before. Like this guy isn't, he's not following the normal atheistic script there. So, um,
Mhm.
that's kind of where I got hung up, and that's why I think what you do is really important, and that's why I think it's important to have this discussion. Is what are some ways we can really teach other Christians to think differently going into conversations with an unbeliever? Maybe they're atheists, maybe they're uh, Hindu, or whatever, maybe whatever worldview it is that they hold. But yeah, what are kind of some of the foundational things you go over when thinking about those things?
Yeah, like just to cross reasoning across worldview lines, like the foundations of those.
Yeah, just the foundations of thinking differently as a Christian in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, oh man, yeah, we can really unpack that. Depends on how long do you want to get into that. Yeah, foundations for thinking in general. I'll start here and then we can see kind of where we want to go with that. So, the first thing I'll say is uh being able to distinguish between two senses by which we say the term logic, right? And one thing you'll learn in philosophy, specifically in the analytic philosophical tradition, which is simply it's more about being as precise as possible, breaking down ideas in bite-sized, analyzable pieces, right? That's what that school of thought does, and that's where I come out of. And
Mm,
when we use the term logic, we can use the term loosely, or we can use the term in a strict way. Oftentimes, the average person you'll talk to, the average Christian you'll talk to, we say logic. The first thing that they think in their mind is like it's equivalent to common sense. It's just interchangeable with the word common sense or logic. You can use the same thing, it means the same exact thing, has same meaning, right? Oh well, that's not logical, right? They mean, oh well, that doesn't coincide with common sense. And it's first moving away from the loose understanding of logic, which is that, to understanding logic in its strict sense. And that's more of the formal discipline of logic, which is what we can actually call either the laws of thought, as Aristotle originally referred to it as, or what I call the rules and guidelines for good reasoning. Logic gives us the rules and guidelines for good reasoning. So, if a person desires to reason rightly, to reason well, to reason appropriately, then to satisfy that desire, they ought to follow logic. They ought to follow the guidelines of logic. All right, so that's the first step. The second step is, well, what does that look like? Well, there are the three main classical laws of logic, and I think that every person should be able to identify. This is what I tell people is the amount of people that are not trained in any formal logical discipline is 99% of the population. And with that being said, majority of people then are not holding themselves rigorously accountable to reasoning well. People oftentimes, I've made super many mistakes while being casual conversations, and I'll be like doing the Socratic method on somebody. I don't
Mm.
even know I'm doing it, and they feel like
Yeah.
they're getting attacked when I'm just asking them how their beliefs are consistent, and they don't even
Mhm.
know. Most people do not care about really holding themselves accountable and conforming themselves to logic, making sure that their beliefs are consistent, making sure that they don't run into any contradictions. And so the laws of logic help us identify, how to actually format our thinking. You have the law of identity, which is simple, right? A thing is identical to itself. A equals A, right?
Mhm.
You have next, and this is the one that we all probably know, the law of non-contradiction,
Mhm.
right? A and not a contradiction is A and not A are true at the same time in the same respect. Now, I will tell you, Mark, people always forget that last part. A
Right.
contradiction is not A and not A at the same time. A
Right.
contradiction is A and not A at the same time in the same respect. And
Right.
and
I
that's the
think
part.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just to kind of give people that are listening maybe an example of that would be you know, like I guess I could say it's raining in Seattle, and it's also true that it's not raining in Delaware, where I'm at, right? And that wouldn't be a contradiction, but it would be a contradiction to say that it's raining in Seattle, but it's also not raining in Seattle. Like, so that would
Exactly,
be
because that's the same
true and
respect.
not true in the same respect. So that's
Exactly.
right.
And
So,
and to talk about worldviews, right? This is where Muslims, especially Muslim apologists, this is actually how they argue against the hypostatic union,
right,
meaning
right,
God is fully man and fully human, right? Jesus is fully man and fully human. They'll say, well, contradiction, well, not in the same respect.
right,
One, you have two respects: human nature, God nature, right?
right, right. Yep.
So but yeah, so they have law of non-contradiction, and then what's called the LEM or law of excluded middle. It's
Hmm.
A or not A, right? It's either A or it's not A. Super simple stuff. Being
Right.
able to identify that, Mark, is like the biggest part for people to start. The second thing that I will say on that is, and logic is going to be the bedrock for where we all start if we're just going to even begin reasoning. The second part is understanding what a valid and an invalid inference is. Now, big word here, inference. Super simple. An inference is just the process of going from a set of premises to a conclusion. It's super simple. So, in philosophy, we have these things called arguments, and an argument is a set of premises. These are a bunch of supporting statements for your conclusion. So, if your conclusion, right, is that Socrates is mortal, right? If you're taking a philosophy 101 class, you're going to learn this argument. You're going to learn one, all men are mortal. Two, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, therefore Socrates is mortal. So the conclusion, therefore Socrates is mortal, is supported by the previous two premises. Okay, this is called an inference, but more specifically, this is a valid inference. Now, this is
Hmm.
the really cool thing, and majority of people don't know this, is that there are actual rules for valid inference. There's actually 8 of them. There are 8 valid rules of logical inference. And the beautiful thing about this is if you know them, then when you hear someone talking to you, so if you're talking to someone that's not a Christian, let's say they're a Hindu, an atheist, or a Muslim, what I teach my students to do is listen for every word and every sentence they utter and try to imagine it fitting inside and plugging the sentence structure for a valid logical argument. If you can't situate them in any of the 8 valid rules of inference, what have they done? They've made an invalid argument. Now, the cool thing about when someone makes an invalid argument is you don't have to do anything as the Christian. You just gently encourage the person to try again. Hey, listen, your conclusion did not follow from your supporting premises. So I'm going to need you to rework your argument again for me so that it actually does, right?
Hmm.
When someone makes an invalid argument, they're basically not following the rules of reasoning, meaning they're just not engaging rationally. So a lot of Christians I see do, and I really encourage this on in my academy, is oftentimes because we're taught to be kind, we're taught to be nice, all these different things. We let people get away with too many things. And I
Yeah.
oftentimes, it's actually a loving thing to hold someone accountable. Hey, listen, I know that you have just told me a lot of the beliefs that you hold, but actually none of what you said actually gets you to your conclusion. So I don't know how to help you here because I don't even know how you got here, right?
Mhm.
So that's, I would say, the first part is getting your logical foundations, knowing the three classical laws of logic, and knowing the 8 valid rules of inference. I will tell you, Mark, if any Christian learns that, they will realize how many people, they will actually be so turned off by the world because they will realize how many people cannot, to save their lives, make an argument that actually works for their views.
Mhm. Yeah, and it makes me think of, I mean, kind of trailing off a little bit, but it makes me think of the book "Tactics" by Greg Koukl. Is I don't know if you've read that one, but highly recommend that. But he encourages Christians to ask a lot of questions in conversation. When somebody makes some kind of assertion, ask simple questions like, what do you mean by that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? Just as you were saying, a lot of the times their conclusions don't really follow from the premises. It's you can find a similar thing when you ask people questions like, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what do you mean by that? You'll find that a lot of people don't know why they came to that conclusion, or a lot of people really don't know what they mean by that because they've just simply heard it from a friend, or I don't know, some AI generated video on TikTok or something, and they ran with it and took it as truth. I think one of the best examples of that is when you hear somebody say, "Well, the Bible was changed at the Council of Nicaea, and Constantine picked all of the books of the Bible." Now, eh, I think a lot of Christians in the apologetic world are going to have the temptation to defend that with all the historical data. But I think an easier way to go about that is to simply just ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? Instead of
Mm-hmm.
getting into all of the deep history of how the text of scripture came together and the canon and all of those things, instead of getting into all that, just simply ask them, like, how did you come to that conclusion? Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that they have no reason for that conclusion. And in which case, they're really just being arbitrary, because if you hold to a belief without justification, then that's what being arbitrary is. And um yeah, so I think in practice, it doesn't always look like these kind of clean,
Nope.
I guess syllogisms, is kind of what you would call the multiple premise into a conclusion type thing. Um but yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that that's like a good way to go with that type of thing? It's like you don't necessarily have to defend something you don't even really believe. And I think that a lot of the time people are attacking things that we really don't even believe. It's like, well, you support slavery, right? Because they want to point to Exodus 21 or whatever, and you're like, I don't have to defend that because I don't believe that. That's a straw man, and you're really just making things up to try to make it sound like my worldview
Yes,
is
exactly.
is one thing when it's not.
Yeah, I'm really big, Mark, on not defending when you don't need to.
Mhm,
Okay. And Christians get into this. And I think that, on my platform, I oppose the current kind of state of like mainstream apologetics just because I think that there needs to be a little bit of catch up that needs to be done for the current kind of state of things that we're at. Apologetics at large puts you in this mindset of defense mode. I remember when I was first learning a lot of this material, I was just so ready. I had all this content, I had this bag of arguments and ready, memorized responses to go. And I was just
mhm,
waiting for someone to come. But what ended up happening was I would be doing 70% of the talking every
mhm,
single time. And why? And if I truly believe my worldview, right, is as true as it is as rational and defensible as it is, right? And the person on the other side doesn't got it. They don't got the ground, right? Why am I allowing them to interact with me in such a way where the reverse is true? So what I am really passionate about is, listen, you don't need to be just constantly defending, putting yourself in that and question, like being a good Socratic philosopher, just someone who's good at asking the kinds of piercing questions that gets to the heart and the root of why someone believes the way that they do is a skill to master.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, simple question as, well, how did you come to that conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
One I really like asking is, can you give me an argument for that? What I like about that one, Mark, is what that forces the person to do is it forces them to hold themselves accountable to those laws of logic, to those
Right.
valid inference rules. So I'll say, can you give me an argument for that? I want to see all the steps explicitly stated to get to where you're going. Another way you can ask that in a more informal sense would be, can you show me step by step how you got to your conclusion?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what you can do is at every step along the way, well, you can ask yourself, well, wait a minute. And I actually have a three-pronged checklist, a threefold checklist. The first one is, hey, listen, is the person using an ambiguous term or phrase? This is huge. Okay, let's take one of the most used ambiguous terms or phrases. Good. The word good. What does good mean? Every person has it feels like every person has a different idea of what the word good means, right? And there's
Mm-hmm.
different senses in which we can use the word good, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is good for me to get to work on time. Well, why? Do I
Mm-hmm.
mean that in the moral sense, or do I mean that in a more pragmatic sense? Oh, I mean in a more pragmatic sense. It's good for me to get in the work on time. Why? So that I don't get fired, right? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I keep my job, right? That's
Yeah.
a very different sense of good than it was good, right? That I got my dental appointment on the books, right? That's more of a health-based good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that more is going to tie into like some moral good, right? Or it was good that I gave to that charity. Okay, that's going to be a good in the moral sense. So if someone throws out the word, well, it's not good. Well, what do they
Yeah.
mean by good? So calling
Yeah.
on ambiguous terms or phrases. The second is what they're saying actually true?
Yeah.
So if along the steps, right? I remember I was discussing with somebody and they assumed in their argument, they were like, well, he says we can take he was talking about the resurrection, and he was talking about the resurrection appearances, and he referred to them as resurrection apparitions.
Mm-mm. Mm.
Okay, so you know what my mind did? I was like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Hold on.
isn't that what is up for debate? If these are mere apparitions, right? Isn't that what's up for debate? So I said, wait a minute. I'm like, you can't just say that they're apparitions. That's kind of the
Yeah.
whole debate here, is
Yeah. You've
whether or
already
not they are.
concluded, what's in your premise.
Right.
It's circular, it's
And that gets us to the next step, which is logical fallacies. So,
Mhm.
is what they're saying true or false? And then three is a logical fallacy. Are
Right.
they are they making mistakes in their reasoning process? And a
Mhm.
mistake in the reasoning process is going to be what we call a logical fallacy. And again, like you said right there, circular reasoning, but a instance of circular reasoning is going to be what we call begging the question.
Right.
And it's where you have an assumption built in to your argument that has yet to be supported.
Yeah. So, like
And
an
so
example, people call Christians circular. It would be circular if you said, "Well, God exists because the Bible says He exists," or "The Bible's true because God says so." Your conclusion is in
exactly,
your premise. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Or when I discuss with Muslims, right? They'll say that, their belief is that the Quran, is not written by men, so it's incorruptible, right? And I go, okay, well, how do you know that the Quran cannot be corrupted? Where'd you find that? And it's like, well, it says that
Allah
in the
says so.
Quran.
Right.
Okay, well, how do you know that the Quran is actually incorruptible? I need you to justify that. It's like, well, that's just what it means for the Quran to be the holy book, is that it's incorruptible. It's like, hey, wait a minute, but no,
Yeah.
we need to get outside. I need to know
Yeah.
why I should believe that. Or
Right.
when they talk about Muhammad, right? Received the true gospel, what they call the Injil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we ask, okay, well, how do you know Muhammad received that? Well, the Quran says that the Quran cannot be false.
Yeah.
It's like, that doesn't answer my question,
Yeah. Yeah. You're
right?
just doing this.
Yeah, exactly. So these are things that people oftentimes let slide when they don't need to. So notice how if I were to hold someone accountable, right, in that way, I would be holding them accountable to, hey, define your terms. Let's get some clear terms on the table. Hey, I don't know if what you said is actually true. And
Mhm.
then three, you actually have made some logical errors that you need to go fix. Mark, is there anything I need to do as a Christian? No. There's nothing I need to do as a Christian in this moment. But what Christians want to do is they want to go, well, when do I get to the part where I present the argument? You don't.
Yeah.
You
Well,
don't
I
unless
think
it's
I
heard.
think there's this temptation in apologetics, and I did this early on too, where we feel like we're going into a debate or an argument at all times, and it's like we have to win the debate or the argument. And I think that that's just completely wrongheaded. It's you want to win the person, not the debate. It's not about winning a debate. It's not about winning an argument. It's ultimately about getting to the gospel and leading them to the gospel, right? I mean, it's have you experienced that, early on? Did you feel that temptation, like, oh, I really need to own this person? Or it's not so
Oh,
much owning the person, it's owning their arguments, but loving that person, right? I think.
yeah, yeah. So I have a very argumentative personality already.
Right, right.
And it's something that I've had to
Most
tone down.
apologists too.
Exactly right. And as I got more philosophically competent, I learned that I had great power comes with great responsibility. Right.
Mhm.
Classic.
Yeah.
So what I did is I took it from a 10 to like my base level is probably like maybe a 4 or 5 now, right?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
And and basically in the beginning I was almost having to prove to myself that I could prove Christianity. So if
Mhm.
I can't own this person, I'm not really who I say I am. So that it was more of an identity based motivation, right?
Right.
And so for me in the beginning, it was owning someone, right, in a conversation about my faith was a reflection of the work I've done so that I can actually be taken seriously incredibly as a voice for Christianity, right?
Right.
That
Right.
my apologetic ability, because remember I told you it was at one point in time I'd be afraid to click on a Sam Harris clip.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
because I was afraid
Right.
that my faith, I would counter an objection that I couldn't handle. And I didn't
Yeah.
want to go through that process. So it's like, okay, well, so it was really about me. And I had to learn how to make it about the other person as I got more competent in my ability to reason about my beliefs and other worldviews.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think what you touched on earlier is defining terms is super important, and that's a big part of, I think, doing philosophy, because if you don't define terms early on in the conversation, or at least when a new term is brought up, what do you mean by that? Um, it's super easy to just talk past one another and completely misunderstand one another. Like an example might be when you're talking about, I don't know, like the issue of evolution, right? Like somebody might say, well, we know evolution's true. We see evolution happening every day. Which, one, it's kind of a circular, or statement, but as well, it's they're using the word evolution in two different senses there.
Yes.
Because when they say we know evolution's true, what they're talking about is Darwinian evolution. One kind of being turning into another kind of being over space and time. And then when they
Hmm.
say we see evolution happening every day, what they're saying is we see change happening every day. So in one sense, they're talking about Darwinian evolution, and then in the other sense, they're just speaking of change, or some change over time. That's two different versions or two different meanings to the same word. And unless you define what they're talking about, like you said, you're going to be letting them get away with something we shouldn't let them get away with. Really, what they're doing is they're equivocating, which is just a fancy way of saying you're using the same word in two different senses, and acting as though they mean the same thing. And I I think another thing to keep in mind as a Christian is like you said, you were afraid to click on who was it? It was
It was Sam
different.
Harris.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sam Harris, one of the four horsemen of the new atheist movement. You know, we're like afraid to click on these things or read a certain article because we're going to be challenged. But one thing I would encourage believers to click on those things more, because it's good to be challenged. It's good to really bring yourself to this place of deep thinking. Okay, how do I work through this? How do I address the things they're saying? I think that's going to help us, one, think differently, like what we're talking about. But two, it's going to bring us a level of humility that is needed, because it's okay as a Christian to say I don't know. And I think that we have gotten away from that. We've gotten to this place where we feel like we have to have an answer for every single thing that somebody throws at us, and that's impossible. You're not going to have all the knowledge in the world to be able to articulate and understand every single argument or every single thing that somebody might say. And just take comfort in the fact that Christianity does not hinge on your knowledge of all things.
Yes,
It doesn't stand or fall on whether or not you know everything. Christianity can still be true even if you don't know something, and that's
exactly.
fine. It's totally fine to say I don't know. And what I think we should do is say, if you're talking to somebody, be like, I don't really know. I haven't looked into that. Let me dig into that and get back to you. And I think that's fine. That's fine to do that.
Exactly.
But what we need to do if we say that is to dig into that, because you don't ever want to say I don't know about the same thing twice. you know. So if
Sure.
that person comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, did you ever look into that thing?" and you're like, "What thing?" Like don't be that guy. If you say you're going to look into it, then look into it, and be able to talk about it next time. But yeah, don't go into every conversation super anxious, like, "Oh man, they might bring up something I don't know." Maybe they
Yeah.
will. That's fine. Whatever. Just say you don't know. Like, I don't know. I've never heard that before. Like, let me look
Yeah,
into it.
absolutely. Well, Mark, I actually have something here
Oh yeah.
that
Okay.
is from the philosopher Timothy McGrew.
Okay.
Super, super, super good. All things miracles, resurrection,
Yeah.
evidence, epistemology, and he says he actually calls it the fallacy of objections, and he says this in a handout. He says it's easy to get fixated on some particular objection that we cannot at present answer in a fully satisfactory way. The
Hmm.
key question is this: on which side of the issue do the greater objections lie? And he says it requires more faith to be a consistent atheist than it does to be a Christian.
Yeah.
So Tim McGrew's approach is, listen, you might not be able to even have a full satisfactory answer on the spot, but it doesn't matter because you can zoom out 30,000 foot view, look at the macro and go, well, which worldview has more problems?
Yeah.
And
Right.
that alone, okay, if I can't answer this very specific detail, maybe about, what did Papias, say about, the early disciples, right?
Right.
Maybe I
Yeah.
can't answer that when pressed.
Yeah.
But if I zoom out, look at a 30,000 foot view, I can go, well, which worldview has bigger issues? Okay, well then,
Yeah.
you count up the objections. The one that has the greater objections, all right, well then my only option is principle of excluding. Boom, exclude it. I'm
Hmm.
going to be a Christian then, right? That's kind of how it is. So that can be a tool for people to not freak out, because I get students who come to me who, they're still in the phase of things where objections are keeping them up at night.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I don't know about you, but like for me, I can absolutely say that there are no intellectual objections that keep me up at night. That doesn't happen. I have questions, but my
Yeah.
questions are more so like, where do I fall? It's very specific. Like, what's the very specific view, and like, what scholar do I really like when it comes to like eschatology? Okay,
Hmm.
that would be more of a question that I have, but it's not
Yeah.
something I think about before I go to bed or the first thing I think about when I wake up. It's more
Yeah.
so, hey, listen, if I spend the next 6 months buying every book I can on the topic, I'll probably get to where I'm at, where I want to go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I just haven't done it yet, but it doesn't bother me. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, your whole worldview isn't hinging on, your eschatology or, well, I guess for some people it might, but yeah, I don't. There was a time where I was like that, where I would have a conversation with somebody and I'm like, man, they tore me up. They brought up some objections that I just haven't heard before, and I really don't know how to answer them, and I feel like I failed and all this, and it's like God's sovereign. He's planting seeds, he's converting hearts, regardless of
Mhm.
how good you are at knowing things or being an apologist or being an evangelist or I mean, just go through the Bible and look at all the people that were completely unqualified to do the things that God told them to do, and he still brought forth what he wanted and his will through those flawed people that felt completely inadequate. Moses, like I mean, look at all these guys. It's just all throughout. It's all throughout the Bible. And um yeah, I think one of my favorite things to do is to really try to hear the assumptions in an argument. Like you brought up the problem of evil, and when somebody brings up the problem of evil, they might say, well, I became an atheist, because of the problem of evil. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so you were a Christian, and then you heard this problem of evil, and that threw you through a loop, and you became an atheist. So you left the one worldview that could actually give you a foundation and an understanding of what evil even is, and then you stepped into a worldview that can't answer it at all. And in your worldview, evil still happens. So you haven't done anything to the problem of evil at all. You've just stepped into absurdity and into a worldview that can't even begin to answer the problem of evil. Um,
Yeah.
because you say evil, you're assuming a moral standard, which atheism can't account for. So, it's like, I think looking at the different assumptions is, I think, important for me anyway, in my own experience. But I don't know
Assumptions are
about you.
perfect, and that's something that I teach my students to do um, all the time. I'm like, look at all the underlying assumptions. I say because when you get, I call it root-based thinking versus
Hmm.
symptom-based thinking, which is getting to the root of the cause of why they're saying what they're saying is more important than debating the surface level stuff. You want to get underneath that, and that's a skill that you can learn.
Hmm.
And I love what you're saying because so there's a really good book. It's called A Problem of Evil for Atheists. It's one
Okay.
of the best books on the subject ever written. It's by a Christian philosopher named Eugen Nagasawa. He's doing some amazing cutting edge work, and he actually argues that every major worldview has its own problem of evil.
Yeah.
And he said, but he argues in the book that Christianity is the only worldview that actually has the resources to make sense of it.
Right.
And so
Right.
atheists will say often that they don't have a problem of evil because they, say the problem of evil has to do with, an all good, all powerful, all knowing God, right? Well, they don't have that in their worldview. So how can they have a problem of evil? Well, Eugen goes, well, wait a minute. He says, we can actually formulate the problem of evil in a very specific way. And when we do so, we can actually look at atheism and say that it actually has its own problem. It's not going to look like the theistic problem of evil. It's going to be its own. And actually, what Eugen says is, he says it's actually a clash of values. What you personally value versus how the world actually is. And those clash with one another. He says for atheism, I love this. He says for atheism, he says, you can't actually be grateful for your own existence. And the reason why on atheism you can't be grateful for your own existence, like that's something that seems basic. It's like, wait a minute, I'm glad to be alive. He's like, well, no, you can't. Well, why
Mm.
can't you be grateful that and be an atheist that you're alive? Well, he says the reason why that is, he calls it existential gratitude. Well, the reason why that is because um, the their your existence is wholly predicated on a past series of suffering, death, and other individuals basically coming before you and losing their lives, inheritance of in that process. And he says, so it's actually that process that actually leads to your existence. So if you're grateful for your existence, what you're saying, you also can't wish away how you got here, or else you wouldn't be here. So you
Mm.
either are not grateful for your existence and then wish away your existence because you wish away evil,
Hmm.
but you can't live like that as an atheist So the only way to live
Yeah.
as so he says that's a bigger problem for atheism because it doesn't
Yeah.
have any resources to reconcile it. But theism, Christianity actually does. And
Yeah. Yeah.
atheists don't realize that. They don't know that a lot of it's actually such a new argument that most don't even know that's a thing.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting way to look at it. I haven't. I mean, I've heard a lot of different, um, I guess, responses to the problem of evil and read books on it and books on morality and relativism and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of a cool way to put it. Is the process leading up to their actual existence is wrought with evil, and you know, therefore they can't be thankful for actually being alive because they have a problem with evil, and that's how they got there. Um, no, that's interesting. But yeah, it is true. Every single worldview, atheist or Christian or just any other view, polytheistic or Islam, Jewish monotheism or whatever, all of them
Mhm.
have a problem of evil. It's a matter of which worldview can actually answer the problem of evil. And I would argue that none of them can other than Christianity. You look at the Bible, the whole Bible is the story of evil and redemption. The whole thing is the problem of evil. Like that's how it starts. And then it's all speaking of the story leading up to what is actually going to solve that problem. In the very end is when it's completely written out of history. But until then, fallen human beings still exist in a fallen world, and therefore evil is still going to happen. But to me, it's like if you're trying to do an internal critique of Christianity and you say, well, evil doesn't make sense in your worldview. Well, for the Christian, it makes perfect sense because this is exactly the type of world that we should see if the Bible is true. And that's what we see.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And that gives over the other framework. So this is a good point to talk about. I said at the beginning, right, what I oppose about mainstream apologetics. And I call it like the answers based thinking paradigm, or I call it like the RA model or the
Mm,
RAM approach. And it is what I call the repeat answers model of apologetics. And that's kind of what I was taught growing up, which is, hey, come to this forum, come to this conference, learn these answers. Make sure you got them down in that notebook. Make sure to memorize them,
yeah.
and then go out into the world. And when a skeptic challenges you, you can go into your memory banks and whip it out.
Yeah.
But if a skeptic says anything that deviates off script, you're in
Right.
no man's land and you
Yeah.
feel like the roof was taken off, you're naked.
Yeah.
That's inevitably what the RA model encourages as a negative byproduct that it was good for what it's doing, but the issue is that giving someone scripts rather than telling them, hey, here's the why behind the answers. Because I'll tell you, man, I used to listen to William Lane Craig debates growing up as a kid
Hmm.
because I was like, okay, if a Christian, if it looks like to me, if it appears to me that a Christian can destroy an atheist in a debate, that will make me feel better about my worldview, even though I don't know how to do it myself. The issue, and this is something I never thought about at that time, how do I know what the difference is between a good answer and a bad answer?
Mm.
Hey, Mark, it's funny. We don't ask ourselves this question. It's like, do I even have the tools to even know when William Lane Craig is saying something that makes sense? Or am I going
Right.
off of a
Right.
feeling? Oh, it sounds like what he said was rational.
Yeah.
But do you know the laws of logic? Do you know how to apply them? Do you know the 8 valid rules of inference? So how do you know aside of feelings? So what I found out for myself was like, wait a minute, I'm not even qualified to even make sense of the debate. I didn't learn the tools or principles. So what I teach is I teach a framework centric way to reason. Basically, there are these underlying frameworks. Think about these as the operating system or the blueprint for reasoning that every person uses, whether consciously or unconsciously, to arrive at conclusions.
Hmm.
And what I teach is, hey, listen, if you know what these frameworks for reasoning are, all you have to do is apply them. And you will be able to get reliable conclusions and reliable answers every single time. So fast forward to now, when I watch a Christian atheist debate or a Christian Muslim debate, I don't sit back and really hope for the Christian. I actually, what I do now is I sit back and I listen for who's actually more right. Because I'm rooting for the Christian side because I'm a Christian, but the
Right.
Christian could do a terrible job.
Right.
And if I don't know if
Yeah.
you're on TikTok at all, but TikTok is
Unfortunately, I am. Yes.
yeah, okay, yeah. So you know how bad it is on there when it
It's
comes
rough.
to religious discussion. And you know how many Christians on there don't know what they're talking about.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
There's a
I will
lot.
see it time and time again. An atheist will be running a live stream. And
Yeah.
in that live stream, they will have Christian after Christian after Christian come up, and they can't even tell you anything about what they believe. And so I sit back and I go, listen, I wish I could help you, but I don't even agree with what you're saying. I don't agree with the atheist. I definitely don't agree with the atheist. And I don't agree with the
Yeah.
Christian. And so when you
Yeah.
understand that there are these actual frameworks for how to reason, then getting answers doesn't become something of, oh, I hope I get an answer. It's a matter of time. And
Mhm.
so that's something that I've discovered as I went in down the rabbit hole of analytic philosophy. I came back up with all these findings, this treasure, and this treasure is there are pathways for reasoning, right? There are paths for getting to truth, and all you need to do is understand what they are and how to follow them, and then you can apply them. And again, like I said in the beginning, and none of them will lead you away from Christianity. People have this weird idea that the more objective you are, you might leave your religion, but I've never seen that.
No.
That's not my
No.
testimony.
Yeah, honestly, talking about logic and reasoning and all of those things, it make and like I mentioned before, I'm more of like a presuppositionalist. I like that side of things. So I focus a lot more on like the transcendental arguments or tag. And, so I might even go a little deeper if, well, you're talking about more of like a framework for a Christian to operate. But if, if like reasoning or logic came up in a discussion with an atheist or unbeliever, I might press them on how does their worldview even account for being able to do logic or to reason at all.
Mhm,
So what are the preconditions for logic and reasoning? What must be true first in order for you to be able to use logic or to even trust your cognitive faculties or use mathematics or science or induction or uniformity of nature or whatever, name any like precondition or fact there. And
mhm,
you get even a little more foundational. But I do think like everything you're saying is that there does need to be this framework of understanding these things before we can go into these conversations, because otherwise, yeah, you see all these guys on TikTok and whatever, and they're calling in and um yeah, to these atheist live streams or whoever's streaming. And yeah, they just make really, really poor arguments. And it's like, it's sad to watch because you're like, again, God's sovereign, he's in control. Whoever's watching, there's still seeds being planted for somebody there. But it's doing a disservice to what I think First Peter 3:15 is saying, to be able to give a
mhm,
reason for the hope that is in you. It's like you're not really doing a good job there. You're just kind of like regurgitating some things you've heard, and then these atheists throw out things you've never heard, and now you're stuck. You're a duck in the water, like you were saying earlier, and you can't argue, and then you just look stupid in front of a lot of people, and then it leads a lot of people to believe that the atheist side has credence to it just because you couldn't answer it. It's sometimes when it comes to debates, um, it really has nothing to do with who's saying the more true thing. If that makes sense. Sometimes the atheists can have better rhetoric, or maybe they're um, more confident, than the Christian. And then just because of that, it'll make the Christian look like they lost, even when the Christian gave a good argument. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into debate, it seems, but yes, we really need to be able to reason in a fashion that is consistent with the Bible. We need to be able to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, and minds. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of us that don't apply all those things. So
Yes, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I mean, within this process, right? One of the things that I'm really big on is, inspiring philosophy from
yeah,
Michael Jones'
yep,
Inspiring Philosophy. Yeah, so like one of the
yeah, yeah.
things that he told me way early on was his habit is he reads about 30 pages of a book a day,
Okay.
and I tell people like,
Any
hey,
book or just like a book he was working through until he was done it and
yeah,
he
I
moved.
think so one of the here's a really cool thing, and I actually encourage a lot of people to do this, is Mike kind of goes and his reading assignments are based on what research he's doing.
Yeah,
And then his research is for like his channel, right? And so if he's reading something, it's probably going to be for a channel purpose, right? And I tell
yeah,
people, listen, I study things in research projects. So if I'm, one time I was doing a whole deep dive into the problem of evil. So everything I was reading at the time was anything pertaining to the problem of evil. And
yeah,
I tell people, if you read in that way, right? But people don't realize that, I run into people all the time who really want to defend their faith well, but they don't have these micro skills that they have in place to be able to do that. And so they,
yeah,
they come on these lives, what they're like you're talking about, uh, and they're not able to, abide by 1 Peter 3:15,
yeah.
right? They're wholly unequipped. And there are some little micro things that you can do. Like, hey, listen, don't start with 30 pages a day. Most people can't do 30 pages a day of a book. But listen,
Not
if you got
anymore. It's crazy that that's a lot. Like
yeah.
it's just that used to be that
Oh, it
probably
did.
used to be not even the minimum. and
It
and
did.
now it's like we're
Exactly.
so we're so our attention spans are 10
Well,
seconds.
what's
So
funny,
it's
Mark, is I heard it put this way. It's like it says it was a person said the problem isn't with our attention spans. The problem is we have short get to the point spans.
yeah.
If we
Yeah.
don't have the full
Yeah.
point fed to us in three
Yeah.
seconds,
Yep. Yeah.
delayed gratification, right, is again a skill. And so
Yeah.
start with 5 pages a day of something that you're reading,
Yeah.
right?
Something.
And get there. And I will tell people, like, listen, I said, if you're really struggling with answers, if you're really struggling, if you just need, because some people need that in the beginning, some people need to just have their head above water, so they need to have some answers to get them floating around, right? Okay, first you get the life preserver, but the life preserver is not where you end. We got to get you on the boat, and we got to get you to shore, right?
Mhm.
That's kind of the process. But the way that you can start to help yourself, right, is, pick up a book like this, open up a chapter and just
Yeah.
start reading, but dedicate yourself to the study. And
Yeah.
I will tell you, in 6 months' time, keeping up that pace daily, you will be farther along than you thought. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
I surprise myself every time. I'll download a new article and I'll sit down because I like to do that. I just like to download articles and read them. And I'll sit
Yeah.
down and I surprise myself so I have this little timer here. It's a little basic table timer. Where is it? Right here.
Nice.
You
Yeah.
just press it, right? And actually it's magnetic. I will literally set it and you can like rotate it like right here like that. It's really cool. I like it. And it's like $14. I set it on my table and I go, dude, if I can just see how far I can get in 30 minutes. I surprise myself every single time. And it's
Yeah.
like 30 minutes will be better than where you were at before. So there's a lot of things that we can do to start to get ourselves better ambassadors for Christ, more credible voices for Christianity, because ultimately, right, the majority of people are not well educated skeptics. The majority of people have a certain character of Christianity in their mind that they've never heard a different perspective on. And I tell people, all you need to do, it's kind of the Greg Kokel tactic. It's like all you need to do is give them a perspective that when they leave, they can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah. You put a rock in their shoe and it
Put a
makes them
rock in their
uncomfortable.
shoe.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think the most important thing when it comes to our apologetic is be well versed in scripture. Answer the unbeliever with scripture. Like show them that they're suppressing truth with scripture, because that's what scripture says. Romans 1 says that in their unrighteousness they suppress the truth. It's like when you take uh, a beach ball at the pool and you push it underwater, you're suppressing that ball underwater. The second you let it go, it's going to fling up out of the water and everybody's going to see it. Everybody knows that God exists. It's a matter of pointing them to these truths, and again, I know there's a lot of people who are like, well, I don't believe in scripture, but at, we can't step into their worldview to prove their worldview to them or to prove our worldview to them. So don't leave your worldview
Exactly.
to accommodate them. Stay in your worldview and allow God's word to speak for itself. I mean, also in Romans 1, it says that the power of God for salvation is the gospel. So if all else fails, get to the gospel. Tell them that
Yes.
they're a sinner in need of a savior, and show them that. Show, like, do a Ray Comfort. Show them, like, you've lied, you've stolen, you've committed adultery in your heart, you've murdered in your heart, uh you've used God's name as a cuss word, you've dishonored your parents, whatever. Like, take them through the 10 Commandments and show them that they have fallen short of God's glory and that they have broken his laws. And because of that, they are guilty and they will stand guilty before God unless they're clothed in the righteousness of Jesus. And, I think, like, it's kind of, it's hard, because a lot of people are like, man, I didn't have time to get to the gospel. And sometimes that happens, but I would say, and I don't know if you would agree with me or not on this, but I would say that in those shorter conversations where you only got 5 minutes, you only got 10 minutes, I think in those conversations, it's more important to just get to the gospel than it is to get to all of the potential deeper
Exactly.
philosophical
Get to
discussions.
the root. Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
because those conversations, like the deeper ones, they're always fun to have, and they will sharpen your thinking. But they're harder to have with people you don't really know, that you don't see every day. So unless you're in some kind of circumstance where you're going to have a lot of time, maybe you're stuck on a train with somebody or stuck on a plane with somebody, or whatever, and you have a couple hours to kill, and then maybe you can have one of those conversations. But the elevator pitch, right? If you're in an elevator, it's like, just get to the gospel. They're a sinner in need of a savior, and plant that seed. Maybe the harvest will come later. Maybe God will do something with that later, but it's not up to us to worry about that. Just plant that seed and preach the gospel. So I think that's longer form conversation versus shorter form.
Yeah, and then knowing how to handle objections. So I have a big
Yeah,
module in my academy for just objection handling.
yeah,
And knowing how to handle objections, where you place that in there
yeah,
is as you're giving the gospel. If someone does have an objection somewhere in there,
yeah,
okay, then you isolate that, take care
hmm,
of that, get back,
yeah, yeah,
right? So instead of
yeah,
starting there,
yeah.
right? Hey, if they don't got any objections, then why are we focusing on objections?
Yeah, right, right. Sometimes they don't. I mean,
Yeah,
every now and then you'll meet somebody that just listens and they're like, okay, cool. It's rare in my, I don't, this is all anecdotal, but in my experience, it's rare to have somebody not push back, but it does happen from time to time. And I don't know, it's kind of cool because you're like, all right, that person was just totally listening to me and they were whatever, but, but a lot of the time, that's not going to be the case. But I would also, even in those longer form conversations with somebody that you might not ever see again, the guy on the train or the plane or whatever, get their email, and continue to try to have a conversation with them. I've done that too, and sometimes it's turned into more of a friendship and a relationship, and I've kept up with them. And other times they stop responding altogether, and you're gonna get both of those, but that's okay too. So
yeah, right. Yeah, sometimes that happens.
yeah,
Sometimes, yeah.
especially with Jehovah's Witnesses. I
Oh,
don't know.
is that your experience?
Yes, that was the one that I'm thinking. I mean, I've done it a couple times, but there was a Jehovah's Witness. He was walking around the neighborhood, and I got talking to him a little bit, and he had to go, and I did too. I was like in the middle of work or something, and I was just like, "Hey, man, let me get your email. Let's continue the
He didn't
conversation."
want to do that.
No, no, he gave me his email, and I emailed him. We had like maybe two total emails back and forth, and the last one I sent him, I never gotten a response to. So It's like, all right.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I have a question for you actually. This is interesting. So one of the things I'm currently trying to do is are you familiar with the Islamic dilemma?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yeah,
familiar with the Islamic
I have
dilemma?
a couple episodes on it.
Okay, cool. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to figure out like what are some, plug and play strategies that we can kind of give to Christians at that can work with every cult or, divergent religion, right? So like for Islam, we have the Islamic dilemma. I've actually been coming up one for Mormons, an LDS one,
Okay.
based on their doctrine of eternal law. I'm like, man, what would be one for like Jehovah's Witnesses? It'd be cool if we had one for every single one of them that we could
Yeah,
like
yeah,
send Christians out and
yeah,
they would have at least something they could work with. So I think it would be interesting to figure out. I'm like, oh man, like what would it be for
yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses? Because the main thing with them is, as far as theology goes, is just they're modern day Aryans. So
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing, and it's probably something I would have to sit down and think about a little more and
sure,
maybe like formulate something, but just what comes to mind is using their own material, you know, Watchtower, NWT translation, using their own material to show them that their own material teaches that Jesus is God. I mean, that's usually the thing that I
yeah,
focus on because
right,
they're Unitarian, they're not Trinitarian.
yes,
They don't believe that God is a Trinity, and they don't believe that Jesus is God. They believe that He's the first created being, and what? There's a lot of different things in there, but I have been trying to one of the main places I go is I'm gonna have to look it up. It's Psalm. I can't think of it now, but I'll have to send you a message once I. But it's coupled between this particular psalm. It's verses like 26 and 27. I know that of the psalm, but I'd have to look it up in my notes. But you couple that with Hebrews 1 because Hebrews 1 calls back to this particular psalm, and it's showing that the Son being talked about in Hebrews is Yahweh of the Old Testament. It's likening them
hmm
together. It's the same exact essence. I'm not going to say same person because that's not what it is, because that would be a weird view of the Trinity, but it's the same essence of Yahweh in the Old Testament is what is being spoke about in Hebrews 1. And it also in Hebrews 1 is talking about how the Son is exalted above the angels and how he receives worship from the angels because they believe that Jesus is Michael the archangel. He's one of the angels. Well, this Hebrews 1 kind of dismantles that. But you do that in their translation, you do that in the NWT because it says the same thing as what ours says. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes theirs says something different, but the Watchtower hasn't gotten around to changing that one yet, so it's
Ooh,
still it's still in there. Um, and you want to show them using their own material because they will not accept anything from they won't accept anything from anybody else. They've been taught that everything outside of the Watchtower is corrupted, and they've been taught that most of the time from a very early age. So if you bring up anything outside of the Watchtower, they're very reluctant to even really listen to you on that point. Um, but now I got to look up that psalm.
hmm
Psalm 102. That's what it is. Why couldn't I think of that? Psalm 102. Yeah, let's see. Psalm 102. And it is, let's go to the Bible Gateway here. Change that. Oh, yeah. All right. So it is Psalm 102, verses 25 through 27. So it says, of
Okay.
old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will wear out like a garment. You will change them like a robe, and they will pass away. But you are the same, and your years have no end. and then you go to Hebrews 1 and go to around verse 6, I think. It says, and again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. And speaking of the angels, he says, he makes his angels spirits and his servants flames of fire. But about the Son, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. He also says, in the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment, they will be changed, but you remain the same, and your years will never end. So I show them that. Hebrews 1 is a direct quote of Psalm 102. And Psalm 102 is speaking of Yahweh and how he is unchanging and how he's the creator and the foundation of all things. And then it shows that same exact attributes of the Son in Hebrews 1 and shows that Hebrews 1, the Son is worshiped by angels and that he is the one who is unchanging and uncreated and all those things. I have had a lot of luck with that one. And by luck, I mean when I bring that up to them, and I'll bring it up again in the NWT, I'll just look it up on my phone and I'll read it to them. And also
Awesome.
show them that in Hebrews 1, show them that there's a footnote. There's a little footnote that actually says Psalm 102. So they can't say that it's not speaking of Psalm 102, that it's not the same thing. Like it's directly a quote from Psalm 102, and it's in the footnotes, and it's even in the footnotes in the NWT. So they can't really get away from it. But there's a ton of other things as well, but that's the main one that I always try to bring up. And typically, you just see the gears spinning, and they don't really have an answer. And
Yep.
a lot of the time, they're like, you know what? I haven't really looked into that. I don't have an answer for that one. And I also like to show them, I believe it's John 14, where the Holy Spirit is called He. He's actually given personal pronouns. It's not referred to as an it because they don't believe that the Holy Spirit is a person. They believe that he's just some kind of like ethereal, spirit that's hovering about. And John, in multiple places in John, I think it's John 14, 15, and maybe 16, he's referred to as he multiple times as an actual person. So I like to go there as well.
Wow.
But
That's great. That's great. Yeah. No, dude, that'd be good. Yeah, I was just thinking about like all these different ways you could do
yeah.
that. But no, man, that's
I'll find them all and I'll send
yeah,
them to you through like
yeah, that'd be
Instagram
great.
or
No,
something. Like
perfect,
these are all
perfect.
the cross references and all the things. But
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. I love it, man.
yeah,
Love that, dude.
yeah, it's awesome. Well, hey man, I don't want to take up your whole day there, and I gotta probably get ready to get the kids here soon from the old schoolhouse. So, um,
Yeah,
so yeah, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you being on and responding so quickly and being willing to, you
yeah,
know,
man.
talk about these things and help
All
other
good.
Christians with their apologetic methodology and conversations they might find themselves in and all that good stuff. So, yeah, I know we mentioned at the beginning of the episode where people can find you, but you go ahead and give us some links and things that we
Yeah,
can look for, for
absolutely,
people who want to find you online.
for sure. So if you want to keep up with me daily, Instagram, TikTok is where you want to do that. If you want to see me weekly, right, which is more long form content, that will be my YouTube. And it's all worldview mastery. And if you want to actually accelerate your progress in defending your faith, building a strong, more confident worldview, or learning some of these frameworks that I've talked about, what you can simply do is if you go to any of my platforms, you will find the Transcending Answers Academy linked there. And if you're having trouble, send me a DM on Instagram and I can totally help get you involved in that process. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to help you out there.
Awesome, man. That's good stuff. I might look into it myself. I'm always looking to learn new things, So,
You got a
uh,
thriving community of killers going through the process, so it's awesome,
yeah,
man.
man. I always say it's one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is just getting to talk to people that are smarter than I am and teaching me different things. So it's always it's always a pleasure, man, having other believers on here and discussing
Absolutely.
issues. So it's good stuff. But all right, guys. Well, as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. This is Campfire Apologetics, and I will see you next time. All right. See you later.